A warm welcome to you all to this meeting of the Ad Hoc Committee on the number of seats for the Western Cape Provincial Parliament. Today is Wednesday, the 7th of September. It's just gone 9 o'clock. And as I've said, a warm welcome to you all. A special word of welcome to our guests from the IEC. If you would just allow me first to give the members an opportunity to introduce themselves one by one, so that we also have on record that we are indeed quorate. And then I will give our honourable guests an opportunity to also introduce themselves. As you would recall, members, we extended an invitation to the IEC as we realised at our previous meeting that we cannot operate in a silo, and that the IEC is currently grappling with a similar challenge to the one that we've been handed. My name is Andrikus van der Westhuizen. I'm privileged to chair this meeting, and I want to say thank you very much to my right-hand person, Mrs. Wasima Ahmad, who is assisting me, who has invited all of you, and who will also be holding by figure of speech our hands during this meeting. And with that, I would like to give over to the honourable members that have joined us, and I see the Honourable Mackenzie is quite anxious to start. Honourable Mackenzie, can we start with you? Thank you. You're most welcome.
Thank you, Chairperson. Good morning, everyone. Ricardo Mackenzie.
Good afternoon, Chairperson, Ferlin Christians.
Good morning, Chairperson, Khalid Sayed.
Good morning, Chair, Wendy Kaiser-Philander.
Good morning, Chair.
Good morning, Chair.
Khalil Franklin.
Good morning, Chair, and all members present. Peter Murray.
Good morning,
Good morning,
Chairperson. Sean August.
Good morning, Chair. Derek America.
Good morning, Chair. Dan Platten.
Good morning, Chairperson and colleagues. Gillian Postman.
Good morning, Chair. Hi.
Thank you very much, honourable members. Nice to see you all again. I counted 11 names, which means that we are indeed quorate. Can I just get an indication from Mrs. Ahmed whether there are any apologies that you've received?
No, Chairperson, I've received nothing.
Good, thank you. I do recognise the hand of Honourable Sayed.
Chairperson, my apologies. I just got a call now from Member Maran. He's asking if he can be called in by IT because he's struggling to get into the meeting. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Honourable Sayed. And I do know that we've got our IT people online. I'm sure they will also be opening the door to him. I do not yet see his name here, but I trust he will be with us soon. Good. As I've indicated, the special word of welcome, our representatives from the Independent Electoral Commission. As we all know, honourable members, they've got a very important task, and as we've seen in so many other countries, the fact that we've been able to have so many well-run elections in South Africa, and particularly that the results have been generally accepted. I think we must also use the opportunity to just express our appreciation for the work of the IEC. And I wonder if I could ask our Western Cape representative, Mr. Hendrikse, to introduce himself, as well as also Mr. Shiburi, who is joining us, I believe, from the Gauteng office this morning. Mr. Hendrikse, over to you.
Good morning, Chairperson, and good morning to members. I hope you can hear me, Chairperson, that the connection is fine. Thank you very much. Firstly, Chair, before we proceed further, can I just, on my own behalf, pass on my commiserations to the House on the passing of the late Ms. Botha. In my previous employ, I worked very well with her. So if I could just record also from our side, then our condolences on the loss to the House and also to the family for that. Chairperson, thank you very much for the invitation to you and the committee. And thank you also for the indulgence. As I indicated to you previously, I was out in Angola with their elections, and I couldn't therefore attend on the previous date that was requested by the committee. So thank you very much to the committee for your indulgence also. And then, Chairperson, I'd like to introduce, I see there's a hand up, Chairperson. I don't know whether I must stop.
Thanks for that. Honourable Sayed.
My apologies for this, and my apologies to our guest. I also see there's now a chat in the box. Also, the Honourable Lekker is also asking to be linked into the meeting. She's also struggling to log in. Thank you.
Thank you. I didn't even know that people would be able to be part of the chat unless they've been admitted. My apologies, Mr. Hendrikse. Please, would you be so kind to continue?
Okay, thanks, Chair. Then it's for me, Chairperson, really a pleasure then to introduce our Deputy Chief Electoral Officer in charge of electoral operations. He's based at the National Office of the IEC and is responsible for all matters electoral operations, including what will be obviously the topic of the session with the committee today. And I will then immediately simply hand over then also to my DCO for him to further introduce himself and then also to do the presentation to the committee, if you so wish, Chairperson. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much. Thank you. And Mr. Shubari, thank you for joining us. As you probably received notice, we are grappling also with the changes in the Electoral Act, which has got some implications for the IEC. And we're looking forward to hear from you, your interpretation of the task that you have on hand. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, members of the committee. We are suffering load shedding, and therefore my network is not too stable. With your permission, could I ask that I do not strain it further by turning my video on?
We fully understand. Thank you, Mr. Shubari.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Hendrikse has already shared the presentation with the committee secretariat. If they will be so kind as to share the presentation so that all of us could follow. While they share the presentation, let's just make preliminary remarks as follows. First, that we are thankful to the committee for inviting us to share perspective, but more importantly, to also learn from the experiences, given that we've already traversed a fair amount of work. Secondly, to indicate that uppermost in the consideration of the Electoral Commission is that whatever it is done, whether in the Western Cape or anywhere else in the country, we should be guided by the preeminent need to vindicate the constitutional promise of the equality of the vote, commonness of the voters' roll, universal franchise, and the enjoyment of political rights, which includes the right to stand for and, if elected, to hold office. And lastly, let's hazard to also add that whatever determination is made, it would be preferable that the seat in the legislature do not create perceptions. In determining the number of seats in the legislature, we do not inadvertently create perceptions that rights of citizens in some parts of the country enjoy more representation than anywhere else in the country. The first slide, Chair, that we have on the screen helps us to reiterate the obvious things that we all know, and that is that Section 105 of the Constitution of the Republic provides the standard for the composition of a provincial legislature as well as the number of seats in that legislature. It does this by doing two things. The first is to determine that the legislature will be composed in the manner that is consistent with an electoral system which is prescribed by national legislation. We all know that the electoral system, as provided for in the Electoral Act, is currently a subject of consideration by Parliament. This is so because following the case at the Constitutional Court brought by the New Nation movement, the ConCourt has held that the Electoral Act is inconsistent with the Constitution to the extent that it does not facilitate the participation of independent candidates. In other words, to straitjacket adult citizens to stand for public office only through membership of political parties is unconstitutional. Parliament is seized with that responsibility to amend the Electoral Act, and out of necessity, the electoral system that is prescribed in that act will also change. So we know now that Parliament is still seized with that, and that is yet to be concluded. The second issue that is demanded in Section 105 of the Constitution is that Section 105(2) sets the lower and upper limits of the number of seats in a legislature. In other words, a legislature cannot be determined at less than 30 seats. In the opposite, a legislature cannot be determined, even if you apply the formula, in excess of 80 seats. And that in terms of that Section 105(2), there is a formula that is prescribed by legislation and the Constitution, and it roughly equates to a seat for every 100,000 of the population. Late last year, amendments were effected to the electoral scheme to once again clothe the Electoral Commission with the responsibility to determine the number of seats. Members would recall that the Commission only had that responsibility for a single election in 1999. As a consequence, the number of seats in the legislatures were determined in 1999, and that has never been revised, even though we know that there's been significant shifts in population composition. So since 2021, the Commission once again has the authority to determine the number of seats ahead of an election, and we will do so ahead of the 2024 election. Next slide, please. Can you change to the next slide, please? Thank you. The scheme in Section 105(2) of the Constitution of the Republic is the default scheme as we understand it. In other words, Section 105(2) is applicable in all instances, and it is binding, except where a legislature has, in terms of Section 143(1) of the Constitution, made a different legislative structure and procedures for the province. The 105(2) is not applicable again in instances in which a province has, through its provincial constitution, determined the number of seats. So where a province, as is the case in terms of Section 13 of the Provincial Constitution of the Western Cape, made a determination on the number of seats, Section 105(2) does not find application. Consequently, if Section 105(2) is not applicable in the Western Cape, it follows therefore that the prescripts of national legislation, i.e. Schedule 3, have no application in the Western Cape. We say this because of the following authority. In a matter, no, previous slide, please. The matter was settled in 1999 by the Constitutional Court in the matter between the Premier of the Western Cape against the Electoral Commission. In that case, the Commission had, acting in terms of Section 105(2) of the Constitution, read with Section 3, with Schedule 3 of the Electoral Act, the Commission had determined the number of seats in the Western Cape Provincial Legislature at 39, when the province had determined the number of seats at 42. The matter came to court, and the court then confirmed that the determination made by the commission was invalid because the province had already regulated the number of seats in the provincial legislature through Section 13 of its provincial constitution. In the circumstances, for as long as the provincial constitution regulates the number of seats in a legislature, Section 105(2) does not find application, and therefore, whatever the commission determines will not be applicable to a province that has determined the number of seats. So the commission has the authority to determine seats for legislatures only in respect of legislatures that have not made alternative different arrangements in terms of Section 143(1) of the Constitution. In the circumstances, it is our view that it falls to the Provincial Parliament of the Western Cape to determine the number of seats in this legislature. And because the court has held that Section 105(2) is not applicable, it would follow, therefore, that there is, therefore, no normative minimum and maximum threshold applicable to the Western Cape. In other words, the threshold of no fewer than 30 and no more than 80 members in Section 105(2) will not find application in the Western Cape. Theoretically, the province may be able and lawfully to determine the number of seats beyond the threshold of 80. Similarly, the formula of a seat for every 100,000 of the population on the judgment of the court is also not applicable in the instance of the Western Cape, to the extent that it has acted in terms of Section 143 of the Constitution to make alternative arrangements. Next slide, please. The next slide attempts to place at high level what the Commission will consider in making its determination. We know now that the electoral system is still a subject of a parliamentary process, and for this reason, the Commission has not and is not in the position to determine the number of seats for each of the legislatures. So this remains indeterminate. However, the Commission will be guided by Section 105 of the Constitution of the Republic and Schedule 3 to the Electoral Act in determining its number of seats. And this with a big qualification that this will be the case except where provinces have made different legislative structures in terms of Section 143(1) of the Constitution. We will apply the formula married to other available scientific data. And it is important to pause here to indicate that there is a distinction. When you determine the number of seats in a legislature, you work from the basis of the constitution of the population in that province. However, when you determine the number of seats from a region to the National Assembly in respect of all the regions, the law requires that you work off the number of registered voters. So we look at all scientific data to arrive at a better formula that helps us to marry all the competing needs for accountability, responsiveness, and representation that are embedded in our Constitution. We'll also consider representation by experts and interested parties such as legislatures, scholars, political parties, and the various provincial executives, including National Treasury and provincial treasuries, to the extent that the determination may have an impact on the national or provincial fiscus. The determination by the Commission will only be made following a process of public comments, which will inform the determination that the Commission will ultimately make. As I conclude, Chair, let me make the following concluding remark. One, that the Commission has authority since 2021 to determine the number of seats in a legislature. However, that authority is constrained in circumstances where a province has made arrangements that exempt it from the requirements of Section 105(2), as is the case in the Parliament of the Western Cape. So Section 105 does not apply to them, and therefore the determination that the Commission will make will not extend to the number of seats in the legislature for the Western Cape Parliament. Three, that on the strength of the court order handed by the Constitutional Court in 1999, it would appear that the Western Cape is not bound by the formula and the threshold of seats that are set out in Section 105(2) of the Constitution. Yet, in spite of this, the Commission would seek to counsel that the number of seats determined for each legislature must be done in a way that vindicates the constitutional promise to equality of vote, irrespective of the region a voter or a citizen find themselves in. In other words, while there are provinces that are not bound by the formula in Section 105(2), it may be important when we determine the number of seats that even where we are not bound by that formula, we find almost a set of non-negotiables to base our determination on, so that we do not invariably create perceptions that the vote of voters in a specific province count for more than the votes in any other province, or that voters in one province enjoy more representation than in other provinces because of the number of seats that legislature has determined for itself. On its part, the Commission remains open to suggestions, but it will be guided by the constitutional imperatives in Section 105(2). And then as a parting shot, that whatever we do, accountability, responsiveness, an electoral system, determination of number of seats in the legislature, in and of themselves will not cure the ills in the politics. The number of seats in the legislature will not necessarily result in more accountability or responsiveness, and therefore we should be cautious not to try to use the determination of number of seats as a panacea for the ills of non-accountability or non-responsiveness in our body politic. Chairperson and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to share these perspectives. Thank you very much. Michael, I'm not sure if I've left anything out and you wish to add.
No, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Shaburi. Thank you, Chairperson.
Good. Thank you very much, Mr. Shaburi. Mr. Shaburi, would you be open for questions from some of the members? Because I do see an indication of some members that would like to take part or that would like, I presume, to ask questions.
Indeed, we are open to respond, and yeah, the difficult ones Michael will deal with.
No, thank you very much. And I'm also keeping my camera off. We also have load shedding, and I also got a message that my bandwidth is poor. Honourable members, thank you very much. You've heard and seen the presentation. May I just at this point ask that you keep in mind the mandate of this committee as was decided by the House and as was published in May, on the 12th of May, in the order paper, and that is that we as a committee have got two tasks, and that is first to investigate and report on the appropriateness of the number of seats allocated to our parliament more than 20 years ago in the constitution, and second, whether the current number of seats is sufficient to represent the people of the Western Cape optimally. Therefore, honourable members, if I can plead with you, let's not go into the other changes, the challenge that the National Assembly is currently faced with, such as the accommodation of independent candidates and what should happen if independent candidates should pass on and so on. Let's please limit ourselves to the number of seats and the appropriateness of the number of seats in the Western Cape, and I would presume we are looking at the next elections. I recognise in order Honourable Marais, then Honourable Mackenzie, then Honourable Sayed, and Honourable Christians. But please, as I've asked you, honourable members, let's keep to the topic or the mandate of this committee, because I think it might be quite easy for us to be derailed. And the first word is then to you, Honourable Marais. Would you like to pose your question?
Yes, I will. Thank you, Chair. I will precede my comments by just reflecting on what the gentleman just said, that we mustn't think that more seats is going to benefit us in any way in terms of representation. He's so wrong, and it's a political response he's given there. If we are going to say only half the seats this time will be proportional and the other half will be the Westminster system of winner takes all, then certainly more seats will benefit minority parties, because then instead of having 1% of 42, if we don't increase the seats, they'll get 1% of 21, because the other half they will get nothing for. So I can't understand that there will not be a benefit if we increase the seats, first of all. Then the amount of seats... What's that now?
Sorry, I've muted Honourable Mackenzie. You can continue, Honourable Marais.
Thank you. The other point I'm trying to raise here is the recommendation was that we should have 71 seats if we apply the norm of 100,000 one seat. The report we received is we then qualify for 71 seats, but if we are going to have 50% of the seats must be proportional and the other 50% must be on for independent candidates, then you can't have an unequal number like 71. It's either going to be a 72, which make it 36, or it will have to be 70. And we will then not be entirely in terms of 100,000 per one seat. So the issue here is, which the legal people must now tell us about. We know that Northern Cape and the Free State is overrepresented because of the 30 minimum. They're overrepresented, but we can't give them less seats because that is what the Constitution says. They're entitled to a minimum of 30. So why should we not then be able to, if we want to, increase the number from 71 to a bigger number, which will make 50-50 if the Electoral Act is changed to make provision for independent candidates? Why can't we increase 71 to a number that will make 50% possible? Because you can't have half a seat. Thank you.
Thank you. Honourable Mackenzie, your turn.
Thank you, Chairperson. I just wanted to make one comment, because any other question is going to derail the purpose why the IEC is here. The IEC has confirmed what we needed to know is that our process, Section 105 in the Constitution, is guiding us the right way. And then the committee, as a committee, on whatever determinant going forward, needs to determine that other process. But what we're doing is 100% correct. Our Constitution guides us, and we will lead the rest. Whether 71, 20, 40, 100, 200, we will need to make the determination with appropriate justification. Thank you. But the process is confirmed as we suspected, is 100% correct. Let the Constitution guide us in going forward. Thank you.
Short and sweet. Thank you, Honourable Mackenzie. Honourable Sayed.
No, Chair. In fact, Honourable Mackenzie has covered me largely. I mean, what the IEC has just indicated to us is that the process we've started to undertake is 100% correct. It also makes an interesting point around the issue of whether the increase of seats is the solution to ensuring greater accountability. Now, we are not saying, I want us to also, and as we communicate around our work as the committee and even as provincial parliament, none of us have said, if you look at even when we spoke in the media, when we did the declarations, when the ad hoc committee was put together in the House, none of us have said that this is a panado to suddenly ensure that now we've got greater accountability in the province. But most certainly, it is a contribution towards that. And it does basically add to that. But I think maybe it's also important that, yes, we do bear that in mind going forward beyond just the issue of what the ad hoc committee has been formed for. But I'm sure that will be taken into account. But just to clarify, none of us here, and I don't think any political party here, is necessarily saying that merely an increase of seat is going to now solve everything. But we do believe that it's going to be a contributing factor to ensuring that there is greater accountability, because there'll be more human capacity to do the work. And we know that as legislators, in terms of our hands being full and our capacity being full. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Sayed. Honourable Christians.
Thank you, Chairperson. I think the presentation was quite clear, and thank you to Mr. Sabiro for the presentation. But I also understand his concerns that he raised. But I want to speak on behalf of, the parties like myself, ACDP, that's got one seat. Now, bigger political parties like the ANC and the DA, it's easier for them to have constituency heads and all of that. For us, it's extremely difficult. So I'm the only person, and my constituency is the entire Western Cape. So it's difficult to get to the electorate. It's difficult. And I really believe with the population numbers that increase significantly, over 7 million, greater representation will help with more accountability. So I'm also very aware, and thank you that, we are on the right process. And Chairperson, thank you for your guidance, because I think our job is to investigate the number of seats and also to see if it's sufficient. So from my side, I just want to say it's insufficient. It will help smaller parties significantly to be more accountable and more representative in the communities that we serve. So as I say, the Freedom Fund Plus, myself and the other small political parties have the entire Western Cape, and it's extremely difficult for smaller parties to be accountable or be represented all over. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Christians. The next up is Honourable Maran.
Thanks, Chairperson, and good morning to everyone present. Chair, first, let me also welcome the input made by Mr. Siburi, and basically confirmed what Advocate, and I'm not sure, Advocate Leroux, what Advocate Leroux told us in the last meeting, that the determinations by the IEC is not applicable to the Western Cape as per Section 143 of the Constitution. That provision make it clear that wherever there is a province with its own constitution, that province can determine its own numbers. And then that's the reason basically why they end up with 42 seats in the Western Cape Parliament. The one thing, Chair, it's a pity that we don't have, because it seems no one knows basically what formula we used to arrive at the 42. Because the 39 then basically, and I've read up a little bit, was also in terms of 1 per 100. That's why the population was 999 at that stage, and that's how the IEC at that stage arrived at the 39 seats. It's a pity that we don't have the formula which might have guided us to get to the number that we need to have in the Western Cape. The one thing that stands, Chair, doesn't matter whether we're going to arrive at a number of 50, a number of 200, even 1,000. The one thing that stands, Chair, is that whatever number that we arrive different from 42 will require an amendment to our own constitution. That's a fact, and it stands out as a poll. Chair, we have to amend our own constitution. So, Chair, let me stop there. The IEC have confirmed basically what the Advocate Leroux told us, that in terms of the Concord ruling in 1999, that the Western Cape do have its own constitution, and therefore they can determine their own numbers, and also the upper and lower numbers basically that will be used by the IEC is also not applicable to us. We can go beyond 30, we can even go below the 30. Let me stop there. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Honourable Maran. Honourable Murray, I do see your hand being raised again. Is that correct?
I know. I will lower it. I apologize. I forgot to lower it, sir.
No, that's fine then. Thank you very much. Mr. Shaburi, I would just like to know two things from you. The first one is in terms of timeline. My impression is that the earliest date that we could generally expect the next elections would be in February of 2024. By what time would the IEC require or need to know what is the number that the Western Cape has decided upon? Should the constitution be changed in the Western Cape to reflect a new number? And the second one is just, am I correct in that Schedule 3 of the Electoral Act, while it doesn't apply to the Western Cape when it comes to the numbers, that's 100,000 has not been changed through the subsequent amendments to the Electoral Act? If you could respond to the comments by the members and the questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson. Let me start with your two questions. Indeed, the amendments only gave us authority to deal with the number of seats beyond the 1999 election. It has, however, not changed the formula of 1 for every 100,000. So it is foreseeable in those instances that a determination that is made will not necessarily go to its logical conclusion, because there is also a ceiling placed on the number of seats in a legislature in terms of Section 105. So as I understand it, we will be able to apply the formula, but we won't be able to breach the ceiling of 80 members. Let's take, for example, Gauteng has an estimated number of people in Gauteng are estimated beyond 14 million. But Gauteng will never get any close to the number of seats yielded by the application of formula, because they don't have a provincial constitution that determines their own seats. And we know now that the standard in terms of Section 105(2) is that seats may not be beyond 80 in a legislature. The second one, when should the Electoral Commission know of the determination by the Western Cape? I am not sure. I will have to look at it, but I would hazard to say that if we get indication, say no later than the end of the calendar year 2023, we should be able to make it work. And just to indicate that you are correct, the earliest possible date on which an election may be held in terms of the Constitution will be about the third week of May in 2024. The other question, and thanks for the comments by other members, there's two pointed questions that I will address by Honorable Mare and Honorable Sayed. The first, let me indicate that and apologize to the extent that I may have created a impression that I was making a political statement. One, it is not our intention. Two, the Commission is not opposed as a principle to the increase in the number of seats, because we accept that they facilitate representation, accountability, and responsiveness. But we should not, the point that we needed to make was that to the extent that we do not have, to the extent that we use multi-member constituencies for provinces, an increase in number of seats would not necessarily address those malice, because we do not have a direct representation of demarcated constituencies in the same way that we have in a ward, where you know that for this geographic space, X is the representative in that area, because we use a multi-member constituency. But we take heed. We do not intend to communicate that we are opposed to the increase in the number of seats in the legislatures. Honorable Marais, the allocation of seats in the legislature is not going to change, even if the current bill that is before Parliament is passed. They are not introducing a different allocation of seats in a way that is akin to local government, where the seats are split 50% to represent constituencies on a direct election, first past the post, and 50% to restore proportionality. The election in the province is still a proportional election, even with the participation of independent candidates. So there are no seats reserved for candidates. So whether the number of seats in the legislature are an even number, 70 or 71, should not be a hindrance. Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair. Michael?
And yes, I think from our side also, what we're really asking for is that overall that while the committee and the legislature obviously has the mandate in terms of the provincial constitution, that there still needs to be a sort of overall balance where we take into account what is happening across the country. I think that is what Mr. Shiburi has also stated, that at the end of the day, you know, when we look at how we operate as a country, that overall, when the committee also makes its deliberations on the matter, and also maybe consider other factors, intrinsic, for example, in that constitutional court case, when the issue of the fiscus was raised, the court specifically said, but you know, the legislature had already considered that when it passed the constitution. So it's almost like the court is saying, look, these are all other matters which you know, a legislature will consider. And then lastly, I think also, Chairperson, we as the IEC really be interested to follow in terms of the process that the legislature is embarking on currently, so that you know, that there's maybe cross-pollination, if I can call it that, or sharing of information with regard to these processes. Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hendrickson. I think that is really because we believe we can learn from one another, that we've invited you, and we are so honored that you've seen your way open to come and address us today. I recognize the hand of Honourable Marais. Honourable members, if there are any further questions to the IEC, please raise your hands now, because I would like to, you know, give them the opportunity to also exit this meeting once they've done Mr. Shiburi, you and Mr. Hendrickson, you're most welcome. Our meetings are open to the public to stay on, but I do respect the fact that you have, you know, a lot of other responsibilities to attend to as well. So Honourable Marais and then Honourable Mackenzie.
Thank you so much, Chair. Very interesting. I just heard, and just want clarity on this. Have I heard Mr. Calibri saying that although the court instructed the IEC to change the Electoral Act so that provision is made for independent candidates on a 50-50 basis, like currently is the case at local authorities, that will not be the case in 2024, that it will still be wholly proportional? I just want to get clarity. Will the election 2024 be proportional only, or and not made possible for independent candidates. Can I just get clarity on that?
Thank you. And then Honourable Mackenzie.
Thank you, Chairperson. And I think you've covered me with your guidance that the IEC has answered the question that we've asked them to come. And any other question will the standing committee that's dealing with the matter and the IEC can become part of that process to take this forward. But the question that we've asked them, in my opinion, I now fully understand that question. We're on the right process. And any further, I think the standing committee that will deal with the process going forward will deal with those matters. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honourable Kenzie. And then I think, Honourable Marais, just one correction. It's not the IEC that was asked to change. It's obviously the National Assembly that was instructed. And I think they've now also applied for postponement to change the relevant sections in the Electoral Act. But let me not be the one that respond. We have these learned guests. And Mr. Shuburi, would you like to respond to the two inputs?
Thank you, Chair. But we may have to change the dictionary meaning of learned if you apply it to me. And thanks for the clarification that you've made. The bill as it currently stands, Chair, anticipates that independents in a provincial legislature election will contest and be included alongside parties on the provincial election ballot paper. It does not split the seat and reserve seats for independents and for parties. And once the vote is closed, the votes have been counted, the allocation will almost be along the following lines. You take all the number of valid votes cast in that province to determine a quota. You divide them by the total number of seats in that legislature. You add 1 to disregard fractions, and what you get becomes your quota. So then you take the quota, you divide all the votes, whether for parties or by an independent, and whoever meets a quota is allocated a seat, whether an independent or parties. In other words, independents and parties will buy a seat at the same cost, using the same number of votes as determined by the quota. And then if a party or independent does not meet the quota for a seat, the seat that remains unallocated will be allocated on the basis of the highest remainders. And again, the independents and candidate and parties stand to benefit from the highest remainder of votes per seat. So that is how the bill envisages the accommodation of independents. It does not split the seat and introduce a system akin to local government. There is no split, there is no reservation of seats in the provincial legislature. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Shaburi and Mr. Hendrikse. As I've indicated, you're most welcome to stay on as observers. But if you would like to exit, thank you again for briefing us on your views regarding the calculations to determine the number of seats in the various legislatures for the 2024 elections and beyond. And then also, I think I can speak on behalf of all the members here. We again just express our appreciation, not only for you joining us this morning, but particularly also for your work. I do know that quite often, and particularly I think it's the people like Mr. Hendrikse are confronted with a lot of emotions during election times, etc. And we really appreciate. I can just say that in my experience, the number of years that I've been involved with elections, the IEC has always eventually exited with a lot of respect, enjoying our respect. Mr. Hendrikse, I see your camera is on.
Yeah, no, just to say thank you also to you and to the committee for the invitation, and yes, I will stay on as observer for as long as possible, because clearly I'm very interested to see where the the discussions within the committee is going. But thank you once again, Chair, for the invitation and for being allowed to be here today.
No, you're most welcome, and thank you again. Thank you very much. Honourable members, that brings us to the next item on the agenda, and that is feedback from the research section regarding some issues that we raised at the meeting of the 10th of August 2022, our last meeting. And I believe, Mr. Babu, will you be introducing your team and just informing us who will be leading the presentation, please?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you also for inviting us to a follow-up presentation. The presentation will be led by Amaron, our senior researcher, Lisa Del Carme, and Natasha Visser. So without further ado, let me hand over to Amaron and a team. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I will be flighting the presentation from my side for everybody. So just the presentation outline, we'll be doing a recap of the formulaic approach. The IEC has already touched on some of this, followed by the link between increased seats and accountability. And I think Member Said and the IEC, Mr. Shiburi, has covered us a bit on that as well. Then the additional variables considered in the calculation of the number of seats in legislature regarding population density and registered voters will be presented by my colleague, Lisa Dalkami, followed by the calculation of seats in provincial legislatures in Canada, and we'll delve into a case study on British Columbia. And then we conclude with 2 developing case studies, namely Botswana and Nigeria, which will be done by Natasha Visser. So I'm just going to rush through this section because most of it has been covered already and it was repeated this morning by the IEC. The formulaic approach is the most common and conventional approach adopted and applied by statutory bodies around the world. This allows for consistency in approach by using the formula as well as transparency because it is using public data to make that decision. The approach uses the member to population ratio, which in South Africa, as the IEC has confirmed, is 1:100,000. However, they've also noted the inconsistencies that they've not periodically reviewed population size to recalculate the number of seats in provincial legislatures, and this has resulted in distortions. And further, the IEC has to determine and indicate the change in population size that will result in an adjustment of seats, whether it's an increase or decrease. So in sum, the formulaic approach works best when the change in population size is considered and change in seats is applied, which we know is going to take place going forward. Then to just touch on the increased seats and the link to accountability, there is a conceptual link between the two. Legislatures serve in essence as an accountability agency representing and advancing the interest and well-being of the people. And accountability for the purpose of this report is conceived as the effectiveness and efficiency of members being able to actually fulfill all their duties, whether it's to the public or as political party representatives. As a result, it can be deduced that accountability is either enhanced or it becomes inadequate based on the amount of seats, because public representatives serve and advance the interest and well-being of our citizens, and members who contend with a high workload, for example, and serve on too many committees would be considered less effective than members who are afforded more time to deal with the demands of legislatures, constituency work, and party political work. And this view is actually shared by commentators in the realm who are advocating for enhanced accountability. Further, the Parliament has considerable powers over oversight of the executive, and it's been established that it's not because of the challenges that's faced with formal powers, but it's more to do with the process and substance, where capacity issues, a lack of experience and resources are of concern. However, given the necessary time and resources and support, this obstacles can be overcome. So just to contextualize this within the Western Cape, we have 42 members, 11 who serve as the executive and the provincial cabinet, 31 members represent the people of the Western Cape, and all of you serve on committees, conduct oversight, engage the public, and take on constituency work. You rotate as NCOP special delegates, and you're involved in party-related work and more. And as per the formulaic approach, if the current population size is considered, 60 additional members would represent the public and advance interests and serve the people instead of only 31. Therefore, more members should increase representation, distribute the current workload to fulfill the mandate, and who are in turn answerable to the public. I'm not going to do a recap of this because most of it has already been covered by previous speakers. I'll hand over to Lisa Dalkwami.
Wonderful, thank you.
Good morning. Good morning, Chairperson and members. I'm just going to do a recap again. It's because the section was covered in the first report, but it's just to familiarize members again with additional variables that were mentioned in the previous report. So the first one we indicated is population density, and we can determine that it helps to determine the number of people or population within a square kilometer to identify high as well as low density areas. By looking at population density, it can also help us to determine the number of people within a constituency to ensure efficient representation. However, based on the current practice, members serve constituencies based on a region rather than the amount of citizens within that constituency or region. By taking that into account, population density can be a useful determinant when looking at the level of resources required by individual members to effectively perform their respective duties. So therefore, members who may be working in more dense regions may require more resources than those working in less dense areas. If I just move on to the next slide. Looking at registered voters, it would help calculate the number of seats to ensure that the greater emphasis is placed on ensuring members are able to cater to the demands of the public it serves. However, by only considering the number of registered voters, the population who are not eligible to vote, so it's those that are below the age of 18 and those who are not registered to vote are therefore not considered. Therefore, the entirety of the members' workload is not factored in. But by regularly assessing the number of registered voters, you can use it to assess whether it's increasing as the population is increasing, and also it will help to determine the level of political voter apathy and whether significant legislative resources as well as dedicated time is required in standing committee programs and constituency periods for civic education to encourage citizens to register to vote or to vote in upcoming elections. So that was just an overview again of those additional variables that may be considered when looking at population. So as we indicated, population density is insightful and tells us a lot about the members' workload and the resources they may require. And the voters' role, although insightful, but may not be the best way to determine the number of seats, but may be important to check if the voters' role is increasing as the population increases. I'd just like to move on to Canada. I know in the previous report we spoke to Canada and we looked at their members to population. On the provincial level, it does work a little bit different, although still looking at population. On the provincial level, they actually also look at population density within a constituency or geographical area. So the number of seats in the provincial legislature in Canada or it's linked to the number of constituencies in each province. So if there are 87 constituencies, it would result in 87 members. This is based on the fact that these members are directly elected, which is similar to our local elections, are directly elected by their constituencies. So provincial constituencies are reviewed every 10 years by an independent electoral boundary commission, which is set up in each province to ensure the size and the number of constituencies reflect changes and movement in population, as well as population density in the provinces. So when there is an increase or decrease in population or population density in those constituencies, the size or the number of constituencies may be changed or increase or decrease. So for example, an increase in population in a constituency may result in a split in the current boundary to form a new constituency. This in turn will result in an additional member in order to ensure that the population is represented effectively. An example, for example, is the British Columbia. It is seen as the third largest of Canada's 10 provinces, with a population of just over 5.2 million people. The province is divided into 87 constituencies, and the Legislative Assembly of British Columbia is comprised of 87 elected members. The constituencies are reviewed every 10 years, as I indicated in the previous slide. The Commission can propose creating new constituencies as well as changing the boundaries of existing constituencies. It can recommend creating up to 93 constituencies in total, so therefore translating to a maximum of 93 members. All recommendations of the Commission are presented to the Legislative Assembly, and if the Commission's proposals are approved or approved with alterations, the government may introduce the changes to the provincial constitution through a bill. Just in terms of when the Commission makes these recommendations, in terms of the size, in terms of whether they need to create or split constituencies, it needs to be guided by the principle of achieving representation by population. Therefore, proposals need to take into consideration the impact of population changes and other geographical and demographic factors. And then the proposed number of constituencies may deviate from the current electoral quotient. So the electoral quotient is, they look at the population of British Columbia divided by the number of constituencies. So therefore, if it's one member for every 60,000, it would mean that they cannot increase it by more than 25%. So it can't be more than one member is to 75,000 or one member is to 45,000. So there are limits to, in terms of the number of constituencies and the number of members it may increase it by in that evaluation year. So in 2017, the number of constituencies increased from 85 to 87. And this was to reflect the rapidly growing population growth in the Greater Vancouver and to improve the representation in that area. Given that that area is actually seen as the most dense area in Canada, they then needed to split the boundaries to ensure that the population was spread out equitably and that representation was more effective. Thank you very much, members. That is just my part on Canada, and I'll move on to Natasha Visser, who will give a presentation on Botswana and Nigeria.
Thank you, Ms. Visser.
Good day, members. So we picked the Republic of Botswana as a case study because, there's something blurry here on the screen. It's fine again. Because it has a standard Westminster system. They specify the number of seats in their parliament according to their constitution, and so it can only be altered through constitutional amendment. This has happened regularly in the past, however. The latest alteration was, I think, in 2004. So they have regularly increased it as population increased. The main principle is that each electoral constituency must have a nearly equal number of inhabitants as it's reasonably practicable. So the National Assembly can have either 63 or 64 members. 57 members are directly elected through a single seat constituency through a majority vote. Then there's 4 specially elected members that are nominated by the president. And then there's 2 ex officio members, the president and the attorney general. And the Speaker of the National Assembly may be nominated from outside of the House. And if they are nominated from outside of the House, then the National Assembly will get an additional member and will have 64 members instead of 63. They also have a special commission they appoint, the Delimitation Commission, that redraws constituency boundaries. They have to do this once every 10 years, but not more than every 5 years. And they normally do this after there's been a vote in the National Assembly to increase the number of elected members, or after a new population census. So basically in Botswana, everything is about population size and trying to equalize that. We also use the case of Nigeria because it has subnational or provincial legislatures. So Nigeria has 36 unicameral state legislatures called the Houses of Assembly. The members for these assemblies are directly elected in single seat constituencies, and the seat numbers are also calculated according to a constitutional formula. Basically, a state's House of Assembly should consist of either 3 or 4 times the number of seats the state holds in the Federal House of Representatives, so that's like the national parliament. Provided that the size of a House of Assembly should not be less than 24 or more than 40. And then again, the boundaries of these constituencies should be drawn up so that each constituency have pretty much an equal share of the state's population as far as is reasonably practicable. The House of Representatives at federal level has 360 members. And that can't be increased without a constitutional amendment. So, for example, now if you look at the state like Benue, the population of that is about 3% of the total population of Nigeria. 3% of 360 seats gives them 11 seats in the House of Representatives. And if you take the ×3 formula, that will give them 33 seats for the State House of Assembly. A state like Kwara that's smaller, that has a smaller percentage of the population, will only have about 6 seats in the House of Representatives, and 6 times 3 would be 18, but since the minimum amount of seats is 24, they will have 24 people in their House of Assembly. And yeah, so they also have an independent National Electoral Commission that has to review the number of seats and also review constituency boundaries at least every 10 years, or if there's significant population changes. And they also have some grounds for deviating from the principle of equal population distribution, which is that they do not want to separate communities with strong historical, cultural, or ethnic ties. On the other hand, they do not want to group ethnic groups together with a history of rivalry or conflict. They also try to respect existing local administrative or municipal boundaries, and ideally such districts should not straddle constitutions. Can't get to the word. Constituencies, yes. They should not straddle constituency boundaries. They also try to respect natural boundaries such as rivers or mountains that may present some kind of logistical challenge to the voters or candidates or electoral officials because there's transportation issues. And then also if you have a lower population density in a rural area as opposed to an urban area, you need to make some kind of accommodation because there may be some logistical issues involved with member having to service or represent a large geographical area that's sort of less densely populated. And that's it for Nigeria. Yeah.
I'm just going to share some concluding remarks, and the case study summary basically is that population density is considered as a variable at a state level in Canada. A significant population increase in the area would prompt the creation of a new constituency. In turn, this means that an additional member or seat would be created to serve this new constituency. In Botswana, seats are prescribed in the constitution, noted as 63 or 64. 57 are voted for directly by constituencies, and other members are special appointments. Again, geographical boundaries are considered to ensure equal numbers of inhabitants in a constituency as far as practically possible. A delimitation commission is appointed to undertake this task. In Nigeria, population size is not directly considered in determining seats at a state level. A calculation is prescribed in the constitution, which is the ×3 or ×4 of seats held in the House of Representatives. Constituency boundaries are altered to account for population fluctuations, but seats are not increased. And again, Nigeria also has a minimum and maximum of seats, which is 24 and 40 respectively. So in sum and in all of the case studies, applicable variables are periodically reviewed, whether it's 5 or 10 years, or prompted by specific criteria. And this highlights the importance of the review process. And in South Africa's context, this would be population size and determining what constitutes considerable population fluctuations, which in turn would affect the number of seats. That is all from us in the research unit. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Nomdu, and your colleagues. Mr. Babu, thank you very much for the work that you and your team has done in this respect. I do see a number of hands being raised. If I could just from my side, I think the one reassuring aspect of your research is that revising the number of seats and providing for that in your constitution to be done at a regular basis is rather the norm than not. And I think that gives me a lot of assurance that we, in terms of our recommendation going forward, might have to include something like that as well. Again, honourable members, you see the hands there in the order in which they were raised. And first up is first Honourable Murray and then Honourable Mackenzie. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chair. I was nearly blown off my seat here. Did I hear them correctly that in Nigeria, grounds for deviating from the principle of equal population distribution, I heard them say that the limitation of boundaries should not group together ethnic groups with a history of rivalry or conflict. That's a criteria. How would that affect our delimitation of boundaries where there's been such a lot of conflict between different groups? Is this a principle to follow here? Nigeria does it. Did I hear you correctly? That if there are ethnic groups that had conflict in the past, they should not be grouped together in demarcating boundaries. I just want to hear if this is so. Did I hear correctly?
Honourable Murray, we will give the next person an opportunity and they will be responding to you. But can I just again reiterate my warning that we should not now go into different styles of elections, delimitations, etc. Our task is only, if I can bring us back to our mandate, to express ourselves on the appropriateness of the number of seats. But they will respond, I'm sure. And I'm sure there are more people that are interested in their upcoming response. Honourable Mackenzie.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, can I just add to the determinants that I think it was slide number 3 or 4. I can't remember the exact slide name there. If we can just get that slide up. One of the determinants, they've obviously rightfully taken away the executive, which is 11 members. That leaves 31 members. But I also would like to add that the slide that indicates the member numbers, I would like us to, the formulated approach, I agree to that. So if we take away the speaker, he's an executive authority over Parliament itself, including the deputy speaker, that makes 29. Traditionally, the chief whip, including in the UK but not in South Africa, the chief whip is actually a member of cabinet, but it hasn't been so in South Africa. And in our case, our chief whip, including the opposition's chief whip, throughout the last 2 terms that I've been here, has been involved in the standing committees. And I can attribute that part of it to because the small size of our parliament. But traditionally, the chief whips would have obviously oversight and the engine room of parliaments when standing committees are not there. And that has been, in my humble opinion, a determinant factor why our chief whips are also alternate members of committees, etc., because of the size of Parliament. If we take away those two chief whips, then it brings us to 27 members that effectively are involved in the oversight, and which is not accountability, as the IEC said earlier, to the executive, because the executive will always be 11. That's a constitutional imperative in the Parliament. And the Speaker, the Deputy Speaker will always be in Parliament, that is, and the Chief Whip and Deputy Chief or the two Chief Whips will always be there. Effectively much lower in real terms. Take away those, at minimum, the Chief Deputy Chief Whip, the Speaker of Parliament and the Deputy Speaker of Parliament. And then the second determinant that they used there was the determinants around the density. I also would like to add, if you, for example, take any of the members, and I would like to, perfect example of our late Chief Whip, she rest in peace, where her constituency, the Bergrivier, and including further down some of her peers, where they don't, regardless of which party they're from, have traditionally traveled. I've been involved in by-elections, and I know many members here as well. So you find where I, in Mitchell's Plain, with a high density of individuals, can go to 3 or 4 houses, in 2 or 3 hours, you find that a member in that part will have to travel 2 hours to get to one person. So density should be a determination, but one should also look at the size of particular areas. The third point I would like to also add, and I know that you're using the registrations I saw also as a possible determinant, but one is mindful of the fact that if you go to somebody's house asking you for help, no member of Parliament asks, are you a registered voter or not? If you go to a school, there's 1 million children in school, as we've heard here, 1.1 million children. We have to serve those individuals. So the registered voters or the voter database cannot solely, or even in my view, part of that determinant with respect. I would argue that the population should be the baseline, but also the population may not be the ultimate determinant, because you can't then have 700 members of Parliament because there's 70 million people in the country. What should be happening where there's severe under-representation, for example, us in the Western Cape using 1999 numbers, but now we're 2022. So it shouldn't be 71 members, but surely the formulaic approach should take factors into account. We might end up with 60 or 65 or 55. I don't know where we'll end up, but the recommendation should take into account all those factors and not just some of those baseline factors. The baseline could be the baseline, but then obviously looking at additional, the size of area, number of registered voters, taking away the speaker and the deputy speaker, and possibly the two chief whips that can be up for debate. But I do appreciate the research and appreciate the baseline that's given us, because then we can work from there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Next up is Honourable Christians and then Honourable Lecker.
No, thank you, Chairperson. I just wanted to agree with you that there should be, regular intervals where we look at the increase of seats, seeing that it's done, internationally, where you look at it every 5 or every 10 years, should you increase or decrease? The other comment that I also just want to make, it's also again on behalf of smaller parties, and that was also mentioned. Even if you look at the committees, we sit on 1 or 2, 3 committees maximum. And you don't have any, you don't have an input on other committees that you don't sit in. So I just think, for us, and this case studies and stuff was excellent, because now we can start to think, how do we service the people of the Western Cape better? And one of the ways is definitely increasing the seats of the legislature. Just the other thing is, Chair, and I take your guidance that we should not, ask other questions. Our job is just to look at, is it feasible to have more seats, and is the seat sufficient? So from my side, I just want to emphasize again that that we're on the right path, and that the seats is definitely insufficient to serve the people of the Western Cape. Thank you.
Honourable Lekker, you can proceed, and then I recognize Honourable Maran.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. Let me take this opportunity and welcome the presentations that have been made, both the previous one by Mr. Shivuri and the team, and the latter ones that we've just received. Now, Chair, allow me, because I'm getting a bit worried and frustrated. If one looks at the density, particularly in the constituency, that on its own linked to the number of resources would have an added value into the constituency. In as much as one travels more than 20 kilometers to get to another household, in a densely populated area, you got to receive so many people to an extent that the number of people that gets to be attended to supersedes the number of people that you attend to in the rural areas. But that's not where I am. My issue is around the determination of a constituency. If we are to rely on a matter of directly elected members. So I'm just being a bit frustrated because I want to understand as and when we go forward, because clearly there is a need to increase the number of seats. But as a way of going forward, how do we then make a determination of how we identify what will a constituency be? What will be the determinations that we're going to be using? So if I can get some clarity around that, that thinking, then maybe I would have a better way of understanding, because I'm trying to crunch in the numbers of the population in a constituency like your Greater Philippi and Nyanga vis-a-vis what you get in Matsikama. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And Honourable Maran, you're next.
Thanks, Chairperson. Again, thanks for the presentations that we have received. I fully agree with the Honourable Mackenzie that the baseline that should be used is the population, because we don't only serve registered voters, but we serve the people of the Western Cape. And as we know, not all people of the Western Cape are registered voters. Look, Chair, the one thing that all of us agreed is that the number of seats currently in the Western Cape is not sufficient to serve the population of the Western Cape, and therefore, Chair, I think we in principle agree that we have to look at the number of seats that will be sufficient. And although we are saying not necessarily 71, but we are also saying not 42. 42 is not sufficient. And whatever formula that we're going to use, Chair, will be one basically that speaks to the population. I can remember in our last meeting, Advocate Leroux basically said that we have to look at uniformity, look what happens in other parts of the country. And I think part of the presentation, although we basically have spoken about Nigeria and Botswana, we also look basically what happens in other parts of the country. And that's why we basically spoke about the 60 versus 11. And together that gives you 71. And the same was the 31 versus 11. And that's the current numbers basically that we have in the Western Cape, where 11 is part of the executive. And I'm not sure, Chair, whether the size, if it's going to increase, whether the executive is going to stay the same at 11, and then the 60 basically that will be able to deal with other parts of our constituency, Chair. So if we, Chair, have to look at in terms of our numbers, I will suggest that we look basically what the Advocate Leroux said. We have to look basically at the population and what happens in other parts of the country. Chair, although we are saying the IEC can't determine numbers for us, but we can look basically at what the IEC is doing. And if we agree that what the IEC basically has done in terms of, or their formula, is satisfied for us as the Western Cape, it then needs us to go and amend our constitution to for that number to be captured within our constitution. It's not a given, Chair. Even if we say 71, we use what the IEC say. It's a given. Ours needs an amendment to our constitution. Thanks.
Thank you. I see Honourable Marais has raised his hand again. If you would be kind to be brief.
I will be brief, but I want this committee to be fair. If I receive a report, that means that the whole report should be for discussion, or we shouldn't allow them to include things in a report if we're not supposed to ask about it. So I took exception to every time being reminded to stick to the point, because, Chairman, the last time we met, the committee only told us they went to Europe, look at Canada, and I was the one who raised a question to ask, why don't you look at Africa? What do they do in Africa with constituency models and number of seat allocation? And today I'm glad to say they went and they looked at African states. But now I'm not allowed to ask questions about why, if we follow the African rule, how will it affect us? I'm not supposed to ask it. I saw you reminding me to just ask certain questions, and now the ACDP does the same. I'm quite disappointed, because we look at Europe when it suits us, and we condemn Europe when it suits us. So now we look at colonial powers and say how they do things, and we don't look at Africa, and other times we want to look at African models. So I think I was quite entitled to ask the question, but I just wanted to voice my protest about being curbed as to what questions to put.
Thank you. Mr. Babu, would you and your team please respond?
Thank you, Chairperson. I'm going to ask Natasha to confirm the question by Member Marais, whether ethnic rivalry is a specific criterion, and then Chair, in terms of the Member Lekker's question around determination of constituency, Chairperson, I'm not sure whether we are in a position to comment on that at this particular point, as it didn't form part of the scope of our research. What I will, before I hand over to Natasha, I do want to make one respond to Member Mackenzie's comment on population density. And I think it's important to bear in mind that within the South African context, and this was impressed on us by the IEC, there are significant fiscal factors that we need to take on board in during these deliberations. Also importantly, the redraw of municipal boundaries involved a range of stakeholders and might not necessarily be a practical solution. What is quite pragmatic within the South African context, where population density is concerned, is that a legislature should afford and make available appropriate and adequate resources to a member who services these constituencies that have high density areas. And what our report emphasizes around member accountability is the effectiveness and efficiency of a member. When that is compromised, it compromises the member's ability to respond timelessly and appropriately to the interests and well-being of citizens within a particular constituency. Chair, if before I hand over to Natasha, just to confirm with you, it was mainly comments that were made by the other members, and if I did miss a question, I did have an audio a bit of an audio challenge earlier on. And just to make one final comment also concerning the constitutional provisions for the Western Cape. that it and I think the committee has also alluded to that, how important it is to insert a clause that will include a periodic review of the population size. An equally important link to that is some form of determination that will say what percentage, what size must that change be in the population to trigger or to initiate a process of redetermining and recalculating member seat numbers. So, Chairperson, I'm going to hand over to Natasha now, and then after she's confirmed, if you could indicate if my recording was that there were mainly comments from the members. Thank you.
Good day, members. To address Member Mare's question, yes, that is the state in Nigeria. They have a history of very intense ethnic conflict between relatively small ethnic groups. They have many more ethnic groups than South Africa, many more language communities. So if you have a situation where a certain ethnic group was grouped in a constituency together, they would have a voice then, and they would have a member directly representing their interests in a House of Assembly. And then if redistricting happens, and then they would be divided between different districts with rival groups, then obviously they will lose their voice, and this will lead to or may lead to popular unrest. So that's why they try to avoid this. But I don't think this is very applicable to South Africa because we don't have direct representation. We have proportional representation. So it's not really very applicable in my opinion. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Babu and your team. Much appreciated. The next on our agenda is a presentation by Advocate Leroux regarding the legal options, if I can call it like that. Advocate Leroux, are you able to flight your presentation?
Good morning, Chairperson. Good morning, members. Yes, I am in the process of flighting it.
We do see that. Thank you very much.
Chairperson, thank you. Thank you. I think the members will recollect that at the previous meeting, certainly from legal support's perspective, we focused on the legal position, which I think is quite similar to the views that the IEC expressed on the legal position. So that's not the focus for purposes of this presentation. In the previous meeting, the committee asked that legal support starts thinking about, I would call it technical drafts or policy options for how one could practically go forward to amend the provincial constitution. And I also think the committee, in passing, I don't think it was any formal decision by the committee, but in passing, there was quite a lot of support for what was called the formulaic approach, that the formula of one representative for every 100,000 of the population, that sort of approach should be either be relied on, and then there were also suggestions that maybe it should be explicitly provided for in the provincial constitution itself. I've drafted 3 proposals. In fact, when I started drafting the proposals, I ended up with I think I ended up with about 5, but then 2 of them more or less got absorbed into what I would call proposal 1. Most of the presentation will focus on proposal 1. Proposals 2 and 3 were ones that I've already made, in fact, in the previous meeting, but we can maybe just have a look at that again. When I start on proposal 1, I think we're going to spend most of the time here on this proposal, which is ironic because in the end, my advice would be that we should not follow this proposal. But I felt it's important to work through it, since they seem to have been interest in the committee to look at an approach in this style or of this nature. So proposal 1 essentially provides for 4 things in respect of section 13 of the provincial constitution. Firstly, to add a formula for determination of seats, and that would be then in the text of the provincial constitution itself. To provide for an upper limit for the number of seats, that upper limit being 80, to provide a mechanism for determining the number of seats, and I think we will look at the wording, what is the difference between determining the seats and providing for the number of seats, and then to amend the heading. Of course, these are simply proposals, so the committee may feel, listen here, we don't think there should be a upper limit, or that there should be a different mechanism for determining the number of seats. So this is sort of just a point of departure, maybe for the committee to get a sense of what what options there are. Firstly, on this proposal, the proposal was to amend the heading of section 13. At present, the heading simply reads composition. It's proposed that the heading be changed to read number of members of the provincial parliament, which is also similar wording to the wording used in Schedule 3 of the Electoral Act, where it refers to the number of members, so that when one looks at the heading, one knows that is specifically what the section is about. Composition, I would say, could be broader. It could even include elements of the electoral system, and of course, the electoral system is not something that we can provide for in a provincial constitution. Then to amend section 13, that's the proposal. Firstly, by adding a subsection 2, so we have to create a subsection 1. For subsection 1 to read, the provincial parliament consists of 1 seat awarded for every 100,000 of the population whose ordinary place of residence is within the province but shall not exceed 80 seats. I think when the members look at that proposal, they will see that the wording there is very much similar or nearly identical to the wording used in Schedule 3 of the Electoral Act, specifically the words every 100,000 of the population whose ordinary place of residence. And then that a subsection 2 be added, and that subsection read the number of seats of the provincial parliament must be determined in the manner provided for in its rules and orders. And I think this is where maybe there's some questions as to what an extent or what the mechanism should be for the act of actually determining the number of seats and where that responsibility should be. So those are the proposed drafts, and then there's quite a few comments on this proposal. As the committee's already been briefed a few times, provincial legislative structures must be provided for either in accordance with Chapter 6 of the Constitution or in accordance with a provincial constitution. So it cannot be provided for in provincial statutes or subordinate legislation or other enabling instruments such as rules. It has to be provided for in the provincial constitution. I'm not going to refer to those paragraphs of the judgment at this point. I referred to them in the previous presentation, where the court commented on basically on the fact that section 105 of the Constitution would not apply to provinces that have provincial constitutions. I'll just highlight this wording because I think it's important from section 143(1) of the Constitution. And I removed some of the words so that we don't focus. We're not looking at executive structures at this point. We're specifically looking at legislative structures. So it provides that a provincial constitution may provide for provincial legislative structures that differ from those provided for in this chapter. And the members will see that I'm going to look quite a lot at this word provide and what that means, because the view is that that structure must be provided for in the provincial constitution, and it cannot be provided for in some other subordinate instrument. But we do, however, there must be a mechanism to determine the number of seats based on a constitutionally established formula, if that formula is incorporated in the provincial constitution. I think it just makes sense. They similar to what's happening with the IEC now. Ultimately, there has to be a body that will have to follow a process and will have to apply the facts to the law, and will have to say, listen, if this is the formula, what are the data and how are we going to make this determination specifically? So in respect of proposal 1, as it is at present, it appears as though it's the provincial constitution itself that provides for the number of seats in the legislature, whereas the act of factually determining that number within the ambit of what the provincial constitution provides for must be catered for in the rules and orders or in some other subordinate instrument. So in respect of proposal 1, it's the rules and orders that must determine who will determine the number of seats and when this determination will happen and what evidence will have to be applied to give effect to the formula provided for in the provincial constitution. That's, I think, quite similar to the role of the IEC when it comes to determining the number of seats for the other provincial legislatures. And I think the IEC also commented on what their approach and their processes is, public involvement and the evidence they look at to make those determinations, etc. Point is that that process of determination will also have to be provided for by this legislature. This slide was simply, I think it's just point of departure, some thinking. If one would want to amend the standing rules to provide for determination of the number of seats, one would want to look at certain or a minimum of things. So the first proposal would be subject to the provisions of Section 13 of the Provincial Constitution, because as we said already, the Provincial Constitution will then provide, if Proposal 1 is followed, will provide a formula. And by no later than 6 calendar months before an election for the provincial parliament, of course, that could be 3 months or a year, as the case may be, the number of seats of the provincial parliament must be determined by resolution of the House. That's a proposal. There may be another mechanism proposed. It makes sense that it should ultimately be the House that would make a determination in respect of its own structure, and certainly in respect of the number of seats of the House. So I think that would be, in this context, that would be the correct approach. The determination referred to in Subrule 1 must be based on the best available scientifically based data regarding the province's population at the time the resolution is made. Again, the wording there is very similar to the wording in Schedule 3 of the Electoral Act. I must say, personally, I'm not a big fan of the wording scientifically based data, but I do think that it's useful to use similar wording so that there could be, hopefully that will add to interpretational certainty, to put it that way. One can consider what scientifically based data is the IEC looking at, for example, in making their determinations. And then, of course, the determinations referred in Subrule 1 must be communicated to the Electoral Commission, because they will ultimately have to implement and assign or designate certain individuals to certain seats. So they will need to know what numbers they are working with. And then as far as my views from a legal perspective on Proposal 1, I am not a fan of Proposal 1, as I've said earlier. the reasons for that is the following. I think firstly, incorporating the formulaic approach in the text, and that is important. I'm not saying I think following the formulaic approach is problematic inherently, but I'm saying that incorporating it in the text of the provincial constitution risks ambiguity in respect of whom or what is providing for the legislative structures of the provincial parliament. Because remember, the section 143 of the constitution says that the provincial constitution may provide for different legislative structures. So it can't be an act or standing rules that provide for different legislative structures. So with proposal 1, is it the provincial constitution that is providing for the legislative structures, or is it in fact the House or the rules and orders that is providing for the legislative structure? I think that's a legal question that somebody may ask, and that there may be ambiguity in that regard. So where does one draw the line between providing for the number of seats and determining the number of seats? I think that in all likelihood, proposal 1 correctly provides a system whereby the provincial constitution itself provides for the structure of the provincial parliament in respect of the number of seats, and then the process of applying that formula to the facts, hence the process of determining the number of seats, is undertaken by the House or the rules and orders. So I'm inclined to be of the view that proposal 1 is not legally problematic. However, the following. Considering the significant constitutional certainty in respect of proposals 2 and 3, which we will look at, would one want to risk the potential ambiguity of proposal 1? In my view, proposal 1 involves a risk to a larger or a greater or lesser degree, involves a risk of constitutional challenge that is materially more significant than is the case with proposals 2 and 3. Also, I think I can add here, it was good to see also that the IEC, as far as the Constitutional Court judgment of 1999 is concerned, that from a legal perspective, we are on the same page, to put it that way. There doesn't seem to be any question as to the position of a provincial legislature that wants to, with a provincial constitution, that wants to amend the number of seats. So there's definitely seems to be, where we are now in 2022, a significant legal certainty on what that judgment determined. Then on the third last bullet point on the slide, this is important since proposals 2 and 3 can also give full effect to what is intended, which is to increase the number of seats, but it does so with virtually no concomitant legal risk. If one follows the approach in proposal 2, which is simply to substitute the number in section 13, then one may provide for a formulaic approach in the rules and orders, and I would say even better in a policy document. So then one can have the whole conversation of, do we follow a formulaic approach? Do we base it solely on population numbers or partly on population numbers? And then we also look at population density. How often should the numbers be reviewed? What variables should one look at if the population grows with more than 5 million people, for example? Would that then trigger a review? All those things, my view is, could go in a policy document or alternatively in the rules and orders. And that the actual mechanism then for providing for the number of seats, that be retained in the provincial constitution in its present form. So I think what I'm saying in short is that even though there's no problem in my view with following a formulaic approach, that should not be provided for in the actual text of the provincial constitution itself. So those are my comments on proposal 1. I think it's not the recommended or the preferred approach. Unfortunately, proposals 2 and 3 are significantly more straightforward, which is partly why it's part of their charm, to put it that way. Proposal 2 is to substitute the number of seats in section 13 of the provincial constitution with a different number. Then it will simply read the provincial parliament consists of 71 members or 62 members or 80 members or whatever number the committee ultimately recommends as the preferred number. This approach is uncontroversial. It has already been judicially assessed and upheld by the Constitutional Court. And here we can look at paragraphs 9 and 10 of that IEC judgment. There's no uncertainty that as a provincial parliament, we can alter the number of seats by simply by this substitution. And then I've also mentioned proposal 3. The other alternative is to repeal section 13 of the provincial constitution. And also, again, this approach is uncontroversial. It has already been judicially assessed. So we have a high level of certainty, a very high level of certainty, that if the committee decides to follow proposals 2 or proposal 3, that the risk of a legal challenge to that approach would be very low, because the law seems to be very clear on proposal 2 and 3. Specifically in paragraph 14 of the IEC judgment, the court also explicitly refers to this, and the court says, if the provincial parliament were to repeal section 13 of the provincial constitution, then the effect would be that the determination by the IEC would then apply. Chairperson, so those are the 3 proposals I've worked up. Of course, I'm open to working up a few more proposals if there are any other ideas. Yes, and otherwise I can answer questions. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Advocate Leroux. And I think particularly Honourable Fry, the chairperson of the Standing Committee on Premier and Constitutional Matters, has been listening with great attention. Again, I would just like to ask members that we remain with our mandate and not move outside of our lane. And I think, looking at the specifics of the Constitution would probably be the task of the Standing Committee and not this ad hoc committee, if I interpret our mandate correctly. But you've opened some very interesting questions, I believe, and I'm glad to give Honourable Sayed and then Honourable Murray opportunities to pose questions.
Thank you very much, Honourable Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I do see the sense in obviously us looking more closely at proposals 2 and 3 does make sense. I just wanted to get a sense, perhaps, how do we incorporate or make sure that, because I'm also leaning towards the IEC formula, not for any legal purposes, but just so that we're not also seen as moving away from a particular formula that's being universally applied in the country. So from the formula of the 1 is to, I think, 100,000. I just wanted to know, how do we look at either proposal 2 or 3 within the context of the IEC, within the context of the IEC determination? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Murray, and then Honourable Christians.
Yeah, thank you. I wouldn't like to give off power. That is weak government. If government give its power to an outside body like the IEC, what are we actually saying? We're already complaining that the national has too much power. Well, national is IEC, so we want to give our powers off to them. Now, I got a problem with that, Honourable Said. But on the other hand, which of the two, option 1 or option 2, will give the biggest stability to the manipulation of numbers of people elected? we're looking for stability as well, not comfort only. So if it's left to the Constitution, like is suggested in Proposal 1, it means that opposition parties also have a say. And because 2/3 will be required to amend it, if we leave it simply to the rules, then it means the majority party can at will decide issues without taking into account opposition views. So we between a devil and a blue sea, yeah? I think we need to analyze this far more intensely and ponder over the implications. We mustn't rush into a decision. The implications can be far-reaching. One, if we give the power to the IEC to decide for us, and two, if we take away the authority and give it to the opposition, to the ruling party in Parliament, to just amend the rules. That's also a danger. So I think much more intense discussion needs to take place on this issue.
Thank you. Honourable Christians.
Thank you, Chairperson. Chairperson, yes, I heard and I listened to the different options. It seems to me like option 2 is maybe a good option. But that's why, Chairperson, we have this committee where all parties are represented. And it will be nice if we as a committee can compromise and, like Honourable Marais is saying, maybe just, work it out and go back to our various caucuses or whoever we talk to and come back and debate the matter. But as a committee, maybe come with a firm proposal and also looking at the timeframes that we should adhere to. So that's why we have the committee, with all parties represented. And this is the place where we can debate and look at what is in the best interest of the people and also constitutionally what is the best way forward. And option 2 for me is a good option. But like I say, if other members come and persuade one another, we can really have one approach that will benefit the people of the Western Cape. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I do not see any other hands currently. Advocate Leroux, thank you then very much for your presentation as well, which brings us to the next item on our agenda, and that is for us now to try and tie the knot and adopt some resolutions. Now, I don't know if there are any other members that would like to propose resolutions before I take the lead in that regard. No hands. Honourable members, it seems to me as if the one resolution that I would like to propose and put to the committee is that we support that the number of seats in the Western Cape be revised. The second one is that we support that it be linked to the population in the province, and we can have motivations, such as that it will bring us in line with the legislation, and that the IEC is currently also busy relooking at the sizes of the other legislatures, etc., in terms of the Electoral Act amendment that was adopted last year. The third one for me is that we look at an option where we would not need to change the constitution every time when the number is needs to be adjusted due to population growth, etc., and that we as a committee favor the formulaic approach, whereby a formula based on the population, and then we probably need to determine one or other time, are we also going to go along with the 1 in 100,000, or would there perhaps be room for us to say not more than 1 seat for every 100,000, so or up to 1 seat for every 100,000, so that should future sittings of the House decide that we might become too big, that they will have the option of capping the size of the Western Cape legislature. Thank you, Honourable Lekker. I hope you're going to assist me. I wouldn't like to be the only one putting forward some proposals. If have been reading the general pattern of thinking or vibe in this meeting, please help us with a proposal in this regard, or a proposed resolution.
No, thank you, Chair. I'm not sure how to capture this one, but my view is around reviewing the number of seats regularly, instead of allowing the population to grow to such an extent that we don't even monitor how population grows and what impact it does to the number of seats. But I'm not sure how to put it. I think it's part of resolution number 3, but it needs a better way of putting it into context. Maybe we can get Advocate Leroux to help us to craft with that third resolution. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Murray.
I think here we got to play around. I believe still the Constitution must be the guiding star here, and it must be entrenched in the Constitution with a proviso that this may be amended after X number of years. If you use the word may, it's a discretion of the House whether they want to review it based on facts, like population increases. The review must come in, but it must give an option. They may review this, but then put the time limit, not every year or so. You can say it may be reviewed every X number of years. That X number is what the majority parties, obviously, and the opposition, official opposition, will have the most say as to what how many years must pass before you can review it. But I want certainty, and I would like to see we keep the stability. This constitution with its present formulation served this province well since 94 till now. It served us well. It brought stability. Let's not tamper with something and bring other forces to bear that we will regret later. So I think it must be constitutionally stated how many seats we now have. We won the case against the IEC in 1999 on this whole issue. It's in the Constitution. We will not be lucky to win a case if what we did was based on rules. But it will, if it's based constitutionally, we will win further cases in future.
Thank you, Honourable Murray. Are there any other inputs at this stage, Honourable Sayed?
Chair, I agree. I think with Honourable Murray's move from rules to constitution, I think constitution assists us in terms of further legal challenges, I want to agree with him. But then again, in that context, also agree with Member Lekker that let's find a way to see how we are able to consistently assess the amount of seats, and I'm leaning towards the IEC formula, not because you want the IEC to determine and you want national or this or that, it's just because it's something there. But I think let's find a way to see how we can get some advice on how to word and package Honourable Lekker's input. But I also agree with Honourable Murray that I think perhaps it's going to be stronger if we focus on constitutional amendment as opposed to looking at rules. Thank you.
Any other responses from honourable members? Can I then just ask honourable members, I've made some proposals and then other members have commented on that as well. I think what we need to do, if I may be so bold, is to say that I think one or other time we need to be able to start drafting a draft report so that we can be specific and perhaps then, you know, as Honourable Christians has said, then this report can be taken back to caucuses, and then we as members would be able to come to a future meeting with a mandate from our caucus whether to support or not support the contents of such a report. And I'm just asking myself, since my interpretation of our mandate is that it's a limited mandate, that we are already, with the information that we've gained over the last 3 meetings, at a point where we are able to put a report. It seems to me there's overwhelming support for the fact that, also in light of that the Electoral Act was amended last year, that our constitution in the Western Cape should be changed to reflect not the number of 42, but at least a larger number to compensate for the growth in population numbers, and that we, if possible, look at an approach which in future would allow the number to change in terms of the constitution, but not necessarily through a constitutional change every time. Honourable Murray, I'm looking forward to your response to that.
So yes, we cannot, thank you, Chairperson, we cannot foresee the future. So we must prepare ourselves for rumblings, for more fighting on these issues, and we've got to be ably prepared for it. The Constitution gives stability, and that's the first thing. That's what the Constitution is there for. So let's put there how many seats we feel in terms of the reports we received, that we propose that we have so many seats. And then we say, why make a provision in the Constitution that this number may change, and we mustn't always say it will be changed and be increased. It might even be decreased. People might leave the province. But that option must be worded legally to give us the right to use such a discretion of changing it. But every time when it's changed, it's going to require the buy-in of all parties, the official opposition, the smaller parties, all will come into play, because you will need a 2/3. We cannot go by rules and regulations where they ignore the official opposition and minority parties, and the ruling parties just force their will onto the rest. So the Constitution, number one, with a proviso that this can be changed. Of course, we are curbed by a maximum of 80, so we don't have to say the number. We must just say that the number may be altered if circumstances warrants it. That's it. We might want to decrease the number because of budget constraints. We might increase the number. We could play between 30 seats and 80 seats. So, I mean, the Constitutional Court was very lenient in 1999. They said, although arithmetically, perhaps 39 would have been the right figure, but because it's in the Western Cape's Constitution, 42, that stands.
Thank you. Honourable Mackenzie.
Thank you, Chairperson. We are going to go around in circles. The research has backed that we require was delivered. The IC is concurring with us, our approach in terms of holding our constitution as the baseline. We have the appropriate numbers. We can just change the wording from 42. Should be changed, formulate a fraud, and take into account all the circumstances. must just be worded legally. So we take out 42. That's our recommendation to the Standing Committee, and a formulaic approach based on the conditions of the time, so that it doesn't, so that our future generations, whether 20 years from now, 30 years from now, is not stuck with 73 the way our forefathers didn't think by getting us stuck in 42. So let us formulate an approach based on the conditions at the time, and whatever the Standing Committee of the Premium Constitution determine will be the right amount at the time, which will hopefully be 2024, they can put that amount in the rules but not in the Constitution, so that in 20 or 30 years from now, whether we are 2 million people or 50 million people, that they can simply adjust the formula and not have to go through the same process that we have to go through, because people 20 years ago didn't think that things might change. The simple recommendation, remove the word 42 and have a formulaic approach given the circumstances and conditions of the time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Honourable Mackenzie. So, honourable members, if it's fine with you, I propose that at our next meeting, you'll be served with a report, and that the report then will have options. The first one, it seems to me as if Honourable Marais would like the Constitution to include a fixed number, such as 71, and my impression was that his proposal was that the number that should be included would be 72, or alternatively, then the formulaic approach, and that we then present those two options to the committee and judge the support that each of these options enjoy from the various parties. Honourable Marais, is your hand raised again, or is it from the previous occasion?
I will lower it, sir. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you.
Very kind.
Thank you, and I presume the same might apply to Honourable Mackenzie.
No, Chairperson, actually not. It's a new hand.
Yes, please.
I'm trying to understand why we need a fixed number. The reason we are sitting in this meeting today and the previous meeting, because our forefathers had a fixed number, which clearly was not the right decision at the time. That's why we're sitting here. So I don't understand I've not heard anyone giving me any plausible explanation. Why do we need a fixed number in the Constitution?
Yes, good. Thank you. I think there was the question regarding, whether the court would give the Western Cape the benefit of being able to include a formula, but that is obviously something that can and should be tested, I believe. Honourable Sayed.
Chair, yes, I want to agree with Honourable Mackenzie. I think this thing of the fixed number is what has actually gotten us into the kind of quagmire that we find ourselves in. So I think but I understand if it's going to be put forward as two options for us to engage on and debate on and get the mandate from our parties, then that's also fine. Then Member Mackenzie, ourselves, if we feel a certain way, we can obviously argue in that regard. Thanks.
Yes, thank you. And can I just remind members that I think in terms of the amendment to the Electoral Act that was adopted last year, that the IEC now also needs to recalculate the number of seats for the various legislatures before every election of a national nature or provincial elections. So the principle of, I almost want to say, the formulaic approach seems to have been adopted by the National Assembly in terms of that piece of legislation as well. Honourable Christians, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. The committee must investigate the number of seats and whether it's sufficient or not. I would propose that we look at a number of seats. I look at option 2, like I said. Maybe we must go back to our caucuses, but according to, if I heard it correctly, Advocate LaRue said that option 1 can be challenged, and I think he said it's a bit ambiguous. I would want us to go with a safer option and determine the number of seats. Why are we not determining the number of seats? I think we should go for the determining number of seats and also go for a safer option as to be challenged in court. Thank you, Chair.
Good, thank you. So it seems to me as if Advocate Leroux has raised a serious question mark here, and I think it's something that we unfortunately or fortunately, I'm glad that he's raised these issues now, but it's something which going forward will definitely have to be given a lot of thought and probably legal opinion, and perhaps Advocate Leroux might want to liaise with some of his colleagues, etc. in this regard, should we decide to go that route. But members, it seems to me there's general consensus that at our next meeting can I put it this way? I think we've now gathered enough information from role players such as the IEC, from our research division, from our legal advisor, etc., to be able to at least come with some concrete proposals, and so that when we have a discussion, that we then discuss it on the contents of a report. And I do hope that carries the support of this committee. Thank you, Honourable Mackenzie. I see your hand is still raised. I see Honourable Marais' hand has gone up again.
Thank you, Speaker, I don't know if you asked me if you saw my hand, but I think that members must be very careful. It's okay, we mustn't play politics here. We're playing now constitutionality versus law. Constitution, or do you put your faith in the majority party's decision? Even the committees. Who's the majority in the committees? It's certainly not the ACDP, nor the ANC. So are you giving off your authority on number of seats to the ruling party by saying the rules must determine the number? I say it must be entrenched in the Constitution. We 28 years, 42 served us well. Why can't 71 serve us another 28 years? And then we can decide if we want to increase it. Why throw away the power you have in a Constitution to rules and regulations? I'm dumbstruck.
Thank you. Honourable Marais, can I just say, obviously, if it's in the Constitution and it's based on a variable that is not dependent on which party is in power, a variable such as the population size and a formula, then I would respectfully like to differ from you to say, but now, you're giving all the power to the party that is in control or governing. But that is now for this committee to consider going forward, whether a formula that cannot be tampered with without changing the Constitution again, and the Constitution can only be changed with a 2/3 majority, whether that would be relenting power to change the Constitution or to determine the number of seats in the legislature. But we'll be serving you then with a draft report, and I hope that will again be debated with as much vigor and enthusiasm as what we've seen in our debates up to now. Thank you, honourable members. Can we step off resolutions and actions, or are there any other actions that you would like to propose? None? Thank you. So that brings us to the second last item, which is the consideration and adoption of the draft committee minutes of a meeting held on the 10th of August 2022. And I wonder if Ms. Kamish Ahmad would be so kind to flight that for us? Thank you. I see it on my screen. Honourable members, please check the attendance. Page 1 has been presented. Page 2.
I can't see it, Chair. Oh, there we go. Thank you.
Yes, yes, perhaps just a slow connection due to load shedding. Thank you very much. The third page. Good, honourable members, this was circulated before. Can I get a proposal that we adopt the minutes?
Thank you, Chairperson. Yes, propose.
It's proposed by Honourable Mackenzie, and the next voice was that of?
Taylor Murray.
Honourable Murray. Thank you very much. Honourable members, that brings us now to the last item, which is the adjournment, the closing of the meeting. From my side, I would like to thank, and I believe I speak on behalf of the committee, all our guests here today, particularly our representatives from the IEC, for their input and their willingness to engage with us. We've sometimes found that some of the national government, national entities are a little bit reluctant to come and engage with us, and I really appreciate their openness and willingness to meet with us. The next one is then for me to also thank our support staff that have really done us proud in terms of the research, the presentations that we've seen. Thank you to all of them. A special word to Ms. Basima Kamish Ahmad, who so aptly liaised with all parties and to bring this, put this meeting together. And then thank you very much from my side to all the members for your active participation in the proceedings of this meeting. I do believe that we've already learned a lot. I also think we've already proceeded a lot with or made good progress in finalizing our minds towards the various options that would be available for us. I do see the hand of Honourable Mackenzie and then Honourable Sayed.
Sorry, Chair, you're going to send us through the report so we can just look through it before the meeting. And then I would just like to add that if you are comfortable that we send our reasons for the options before the time for the next meeting. Are you okay with that?
I think that would be appreciated. We would then be able to also include that so that members are better prepared when they join us for our next meeting. Mr. Sayed?
No, thank you, Chair. I want to agree with Member Mackenzie. If we can get that information as stated beforehand, maybe do we have a date for the next meeting, or will that be communicated with us in due course? Thank you.
Thank you. My impression is, but our procedural officer can correct me, that, you know, with everything going on over the last week, that our program has been somewhat thrown around. Basima, are we going to look for a date?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, through you, Chair. I will be liaising with the programming authority or Michaela. Yeah, everything has been thrown off course now, so we will have a meeting and we will inform the committee in due course. Thank you. And Chair, oh, sorry.
There's a lot of background noise, yes.
Chair, now I just wanted to let the committee know that this will be a draft report that will be referred to the House. So we will, with your indulgence, Chair, I will we will discuss the dates with Michaela and yourself, if it's going to be before or after the annual report season. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, thank you very much. And if you could find a slot, perhaps more than one, so that we don't work from one meeting to the next for a date. But if we can have 2 more dates on the program, I think that would be great, even if we don't need the last one. But I believe members' diaries, require of us to give them a heads up long before a meeting. So, honourable members, from my side, thank you very much. You will hear from us at the next meeting, and you will be served with the minutes of this meeting, as well as the agenda, as well as a draft report for consideration. And please, I really want to stress that it's a draft report. Somebody must put something together so that we can now start talking to a specific proposal or two. Thank you very much. Again, have a great day, and this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.